Hi, so I'm Paul Yates, Chair of the AIRE Centre Board, and I'm joined by John Mehrzad QC. So John, thank you very much for joining us as part of this series where we speak to former AIRE Centre interns about their time at the AIRE Centre and their subsequent careers. Could I start by taking you back and asking you what initially attracted you to the law?
Well, Paul, thanks a lot for having me here. It brings back memories in terms of my time at the AIRE Centre. In terms of the law, I didn't do law as an undergraduate. I did history and languages. But those subjects, in particular history, have fairly obvious overlap with the law in terms of research, putting arguments together, backing up and supporting those arguments with evidence. Then, whilst I was doing a postgraduate in France, I also lectured and gave seminars, and I realised how much I enjoyed the presentation side of day-to-day work. And so it was a fairly natural transition then to come to law and convert, but also more particularly decide to take the bar route.
And if I take you back to the time that you interned at the AIRE Centre, which I think is nearly 20 years ago, sort of 2002, 2003. Do you remember how you kind of initially came across the AIRE Centre?
I think the answer is twofold. One is I was extremely interested in European law, European politics, the European question as a whole. I'd finished a master's up at Oxford where, ironically, I talked about Britain's relationship with the EU. And I had met lots of people in politics and in law. I had interned in the then European Court of Justice. I spent some time at the European Parliament. So I was always very interested in kind of constitutional and European law. And in terms of the AIRE Centre itself, I think through through the law conversion and bar school, which I did at BPP, which was just around the corner from Red Lion Square. I think there was a steady conveyor belt of eager students who saw the AIRE Centre as being hugely useful, but more to the point, very close by. So we could pop out for half a day or whatever it was, and then usefully be back in the library or meet friends afterwards. So that is frankly how I came about it. It was the perfect fit.
And if we fast forward now to the present day, where you've a fascinating practice, particularly in sports law, I think. Could you give us a flavour of your typical day?
Paul, I mean, the answer is there is no day that is typical. I seem to just be constantly juggling lots of different matters. So I might have a dispute to do with a football transfer. I may also be advising a manager who's departing a fairly well-known club. I may be assisting an athlete in a selection dispute to try and go to the Olympics or Paralympics. And I could be involved in arbitrations that are domestic or international over in Switzerland. And then on top of that, and you're probably saying, what's this got to do with EU law and my time at the AIRE Centre? But on top of that, my formative areas are effectively employment and commercial contract. And employment, fundamentally in terms of rights, are EU related. So discrimination, working time, etc. All of that I spent years doing in and out of tribunals and on appeals. And even within sport, there's a very interesting kind of jurisdictional dynamic between national laws, international regulations, and EU law, and also various human rights. So something like, for example, the fairly recent Casta Semenya matter, which is all about hyperandrogenism, about whether an international regulator, World Athletics, can essentially say you cannot compete in this event because your chromosomes are too high, and you have to therefore take medication in order to suppress your testosterone levels. Well, that's gone off to the European Court of Human Rights. So, those issues are bubbling along under the surface in a fairly untapped area. So anyway, I digress. I simply say that I have a very interesting series of days, probably with quite a lot of pressure as well. But yeah, I'm sure you know what that's like, Paul.
Yeah, no, that's fascinating. And so, I mean, you've mentioned some of the connection between European law and your current practice. Have you found through the sort of 20 years since you were at the AIRE Centre, have you found yourself drawing at all on your experience that you had when you were an intern?
I'd say two ways. I think one is indirect, and I start with that deliberately because I think when you're an intern, what I recall is actually having. I mean, this was incredible, under the direction of Nuala back then. But I was given, and we were all given quite a lot of responsibility to meet clients, to assist them. I mean, it was all on a pro bono basis, but these were very important issues for them in terms of freedom of movement, in terms of benefits in different countries and challenging decisions. And I think at that early stage, grew comfortable with the idea of A, taking responsibility, but B, delving into areas that I was by no means an expert at that stage, albeit with support. And I think that's allowed me to build on my kind of core practice areas of employment and commercial to then go into a slightly more niche area, such as international sporting disputes, feeling comfortable about taking that leap. So that's an indirect benefit. And then the direct benefit is clearly being comfortable thinking about assessing kind of supranational types of laws and regulations, because we can be experts in England and Wales, but there is barely a single sports case I deal with, certainly on an international level, which doesn't bring in some form of international regulation, potentially a form of conflict of laws. And as I just mentioned earlier, increasingly rights-based issues as well. So my experiences at the AIRE Centre and background in sort of EU law has been all very helpful. Actually, but it's not something that's maybe at the forefront of your mind. But when you think about it, it all makes a lot of sense how that grounding has been a springboard into what I do now 20 years on.
And so when you think back to your time at the AIRE Centre, is there any particular kind of case you were involved in or experience that sort of stands out as a particularly strong memory for you?
Well, this Paul, I think links back to what I said a moment ago about being given responsibilities. I remember meeting some clients who were from Eastern Europe. I think they had recently moved here, and there were all kinds of issues in terms of bringing over members of their family and benefits issues. And I can remember, and I hadn't even passed my bar school, but everybody's upfront and clear about our level of experience. We're going to meet them on a one-to-one basis, and coming back, speaking to Nuala and some of the other senior members, and then successfully challenging a domestic home office decision in relation to them. And you don't, maybe because it's your first experience, you're chuffed, but you don't actually realise what a big deal it is until you then meet the client subsequently, and it's life-changing. So that particular experience I remember quite vividly, and I was very fortunate to be given that responsibility, to be honest, at such an early stage.
Thank you. And is there anyone you're still in touch with from your time at the AIRE Centre?
Well, I received a regular update by email, so I feel as though I'm still in touch. And I receive sort of various invites. There are a few members of the bar, as you know, who are sort of around and about the place. But if I actually think about the ones who were in the AIRE Centre with me at the time, funnily enough, I just saw an update from her on LinkedIn. There was a lady called Farah Ledbetter, who is a solicitor, who actually I haven't been in contact, but I feel as though I know what's going on, because I think she works over in Saudi Arabia now and is part of a trade delegation. And I saw the various photos with her and various senior ministerial figures, because I think there was a recent visit there. But on a sort of at the bar, I don't frequently, I have to say, bump into fellow interns, but I certainly keep in with certain people who do a lot of public international and private international law, but that's because it tends to be quite a small area.
And last of all, can I ask you if you've got any particular tips for the AIRE Centre's current interns who are, at the start of their career?
Well, I'd say realise. I mean, they might not realise it straight away, but they have been given an amazing gift, which is the responsibility in relation to various matters and exposure at such an early stage, which really does, boost their confidence and boost their CVs. What I would also say is, don't feel as though going to the AIRE Centre is only for people who will end up doing pure points of EU or public or private international law. Far from it. I hope my experience demonstrates that there are plenty of other areas of law where those issues are still pertinent and the skill sets are highly, highly transferable. Let's not forget, I was in the AIRE Centre barely 20 years ago and taken silk in the meantime. And there's no doubt that I owe a strong note of gratitude to the AIRE Centre and the opportunities they gave me even before I started in practice.
Oh, well, that's great to hear. John, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us. It's great to meet you.
Likewise, Paul. Thank you very much for your time.